Good day, Sherry. I say good day so because I think your time is different from ours. Thank you very much for giving some time to talk to the Mint.
Okay, I'm happy to do it. Looking forward to it.
Brilliant. Well, maybe if we could start first, if you could give some sort of idea of your interaction as an economist with the political process in the US.
Okay, well, this is a relatively new pursuit for me because I have retired from full-time teaching, and as a result of that, I had a lot of time to spend on working on the 2018 election. And I live in a state that is very one-party state, and I worked in the Tennessee, East 2nd Tennessee Congressional District for a Democratic candidate, Renee Hoyos, and we have not had a serious candidate in running for that position because there has not been a Democrat in that position since the Civil War. But we had an enthusiastic young woman who wanted, who got all excited, like many people have in the resistance movement. And so she decided to run for Congress. I had been involved with some Democrats in East Tennessee, and one of these gentlemen got me involved on her economic advising committee. So that's how I got involved. So I worked with her on a campaign for most of 2018 is what I ended up doing, is working on her campaign as her economic policy advisor, as well as a lot of grunt work, but that's what I did primarily.
Okay, so when you were given this opportunity to provide this advice, I mean, what were the things topmost in your mind as what you wanted to achieve in terms of, injecting your knowledge into the political process, if you like?
Well, what I perceived the kind of help that she needed was to answer questions about how the economy works. She worked in environmental policy, so she had an implicit understanding of microeconomics from her work on doing clean water policy in East Tennessee, but did not really know a lot about macroeconomics and international trade economics. And so part of the goal was to be available to answer her questions. We were lucky, and I think this is really important when economists are working with politicians. She wanted to learn, and she was not afraid to ask questions. In fact, I've talked to her about that this week in preparation for this interview, and she said, "Oh, I wanted you to be able there, to answer my questions because I can't know everything." So I was lucky that I got to work with a very open-minded candidate. Became real important early on in the international trade controversy, Trump trying to set up all this international trade war. And she didn't understand early on that there are winners and losers. She was ready to jump in and say, "Oh, this is terrible, not realizing that there were some businesses in East Tennessee that would benefit from these policies and some businesses that would hurt in this policy." So the other thing I wanted to do was to, jump in and clarify things so she didn't make a mistake out there. And she has also said that's what she wanted us to do, is to be very grateful that she didn't make a mistake. So those are some of the things that did. There are some things that I learned along the way. Well, for example, economists, when we're working with these politicians, we've got to remember that they can't know things as complexly as we do. The messages they need are not know things, but they need to be able to message the complexity of some of these issues in a lot more simply than we can do. And so oftentimes when we were talking to her, we would have probably too much detail. Her campaign manager, she put out a position, lots of position papers, and every time they sent them out, before they sent them out, they would check them by with us to make sure that they hadn't said something crazy, something incorrect. And we would respond, and oftentimes we would have, the message would be too complex or too wonkish or too, too much in our jargon. So we had to learn, I had to learn how to pay attention to the message better. Does that make sense?
Uh-huh. And what you say we, so you were working jointly with other economists? Or?
Yeah, well, there were one other economist, and then there was somebody who was a tax CPA. So we had a 3-member team that were her advisors. And then we worked closely with her, her campaign manager and her.
And the other, you, for the audience, you're an institutional economist primarily, aren't you?
Yes.
And the other economist, what was their background?
She is also an institutional economist. And one thing that we both did was try to explain to her that when we were giving her advice, it was from our perspective, and not everybody would agree. So we wanted to be really honest in what we were saying to her, not trying to push our agenda or anything, or just saying this is how we think about things differently than some other mainstream economist. And so that was another thing that I learned, that we wanted to be careful and have integrity. Now, it made sense to her because she's done policy work on the state level with clean water. And so, for her, it made a lot of sense to hear how an institutional economist thinks about some of these things. And she understood about power. And, so she implicitly, the heterodox way of looking at things made more sense to her in terms of her experience. But we were also careful to say that you could talk to some other economists that you might not agree with. And in fact, she reached out with a economist at the University of Tennessee, which is the big state university, who is a more orthodox economist. And she wanted to meet with us beforehand. And, we sort of prepared her for some of the things that he might be saying as we went along.
And do you think she took some positions or, that as a result of your advice, that if she'd got advice from a mainstream neoclassical economist, she wouldn't have taken? Did that sort of shape her policy position?
One thing early on, and this is what she later said was a mistake because she didn't understand this, was, we're talking a lot about the balanced budget amendment here in the United States, and, whether we should be balancing budgets. And she was being interviewed on television with her counterpart, the guy she was running against, who very, very conservative, and I'm going to balance the budget and all this kind of stuff. And so she said, "Oh, this sounds good." And then she got together with us and we said, "Well, this is why you probably don't want to say this."
Yeah.
She quickly changed, and when she understood how national accounting works and some of the things that we were trying to say to her, explaining Keynesian policy and all these kinds of stuff, she did change her mind after that was, after she had the discussion. And that's where she says she said to me once again that this was when I was talking to her this week, this was like, wow, I had really made a mistake and you guys helped me on this. And so she really appreciated that. The other thing she appreciated is if you go to like her launch party, these people were coming up and I was beside her and somebody asked a question that she didn't really know the answer to. And I took him aside and I was able to help. I was able to answer this question to this person satisfactorily. Later trained her on it, and he ended up becoming a very staunch supporter of the campaign. So I also learned if I can be with her in certain situations that you can sort of help and answer the questions, not advance her position, just sort of explain things based on my economic knowledge. Now it helps that I have a long career in teaching undergraduates. So
so this was a new undergraduate for you.
Yeah, so that's a really important point that I know how to, I'm able to make that transition really well. So I think that was a quality that I had that really helped in this situation. So I'm teaching and she was a delightful student. So, it was a good dynamic.
I suppose you were quite lucky maybe in the politician you had. But interestingly, this issue of balancing budgets, because presumably, if she took a different position, that would be a lot less easy for her to explain, and she might get it in hot water. I mean, talking to Anne Pettifor previously about her interactions with the Labour Party here, they felt unable or not able to really tell a story outside broadly this place of balancing a budget because of the dominance of the mainstream narrative.
Yes, and I mean, that was the issue that she was facing too. Though I would say that didn't emerge high on her concerns of the people she was talking to. It was healthcare policy. I mean, that's what people in her district were really concerned about, was healthcare policy, because the state of Tennessee has not taken the money from the Affordable Care Act, and so we have a much higher percentage of people that are unemployed. We have a huge problem with rural hospitals closing down. In this district, like, there's a lot of rural areas in East Tennessee. So that particular problem did not emerge as high in her, the whole talking about the balanced budget amendment and in her campaign as the healthcare policy did.
And so how did she do in the end?
Oh, unfortunately, she did not win. But she got more votes for a Democratic candidate than any Democratic candidate has gotten in the history, and really moved the percentages enough so that at this point she plans to run again and see what happens this time. And so it wasn't, it didn't discourage her enough that she's not going to try, because apparently the people running for state and also this congressional district had made, on the Democratic Party, made a pledge when they went in there and they looked and they saw how far down the Democrats were, that they were going to go through 2 cycles. So she is, at this point, is willing to go through another cycle. Person that won, it's dependent on how badly he will do, and he's not doing really well. And then also she is interested to see who emerges to be on the top of the ticket for the Democrats, because that will affect her ability, because she's going to be down ballot in Tennessee. So she didn't win, but as I said, nobody has won a Democratic seat since the Civil War, and she did the best of anybody. So
that's a good result.
So she made some progress, and she's a much better candidate. I mean, she's learned a lot. She's still asking me about economics when I see her and all that kind of stuff. So she's still trying to learn. And
so just going more broadly at the national level, I remember you saying that you felt that the status of economists was actually going down, that there was that quote that politicians were using economists a bit like lampposts.
A drunk uses a lamppost.
Yeah.
Not for support rather than illumination.
That's right.
That comes from Alan Blinder, who is a neoclassical economist, but he has been a policymaker in the Clinton administration. He was the chairman of the economic advisors, and then he also was on working for the Fed. So this is a mainstream economist who sees the problem that economists in the United States are having. People are just not listening to them very much.
And I suppose that what is interesting now is that Alexandra Ocasio-Cortes has introduced into the debate 2 huge issues, hasn't she? One on taxation and the other on the Green New Deal. How do you think that's going to play out?
Well, first, Ed Markey introduced this bill. He's a senator from Massachusetts. I think he's been introducing it for the last 10 years, but she has gotten, so much prominence that he got her involved in this, and, she's getting a lot of press. So she has introduced this Green New Deal, and initially, this was the young new Democrats that were elected in Congress in November. They basically protested that the Pelosi's office, that it was a group of young, and they went and did a sit-in in her office. I think it was late November, early December, that you have got to address climate change. Then later on, they had another and what they wanted to do was just to have a committee on this, a committee set up to talk about this so that we
Yeah.
can come up with steps. And it was in response to the United Nations report that came out this fall. And as they brought this up, then they brought up the Green New Deal. And as maybe y'all have noticed that many of the new people running for president have sort of signed on to this. And what is interesting, they're saying this is similar to the New Deal in the sense that we have a pressing emergency, which is climate change. And we want to address this. They want to do it in 10 years. And in conjunction with that, they want to have a guaranteed jobs program along with it. Yeah. So we're going to deal with climate change at the same time we're trying to deal with making sure that everybody has a job, because the position is not everybody who is willing to work does not have a job that provides a living wage. I mean, I think people, the unemployment rate is really low here. And so there are lots of people have jobs, but if you make the minimum wage in the United States, you are not going to have a living wage for a family of four. I mean, we did some work on this campaign about trying to at least move the wage up to $9 or something in East Tennessee. So, and that would just put you at a living wage for people for a single, but it's not for a family. So then now that's got a lot of people getting excited about this. And there are I think it's called the Data for Progress is a new think tank that has been set up to deal with this issue. In terms of funding is a big issue. Things that are one of the economic theories that have caught attention. First, it was Bernie Sanders, who was his chief economic advisor was Stephanie Kelton, who was a post-Keynesian economist and a person that's very involved in the modern monetary theory, along with Randy Ray, who was up at the Levi Institute at Bard College. So they are linking these two things together, because there are some questions with the New Deal. First of all, in the Green New Deal, how can we afford this? And the modern monetary theory is being offered as a way to fund this thing. And then also there's a lot of controversy of this Data for Progress. They have just put out a new report, and they are saying that really it's going to take 35 years to really get everything done between the technology and all the things that need to be done. But it really is moving the conversation into that direction.
One thing that sort of struck me about the Green New Deal, which I wonder what you thought about, was that from a macroeconomics viewpoint, injecting a lot of demand into the system, the big idea, of course, is multipliers and it flowing through the economy. And so it may be injected in what might be called the green bit of the economy, but it'll flow through into the brown bit of the economy. People will spend money on maybe trips to overseas or whatever. So, and presumably that could mean that the net effect on emissions or whatever, at least is uncertain.
I agree. I mean, I am becoming educated on this. I mean, I don't propose or offer myself as an expert, but I don't think that they have worked all of these kinds of things out. And the modern monetary theory is saying budget deficits don't matter, which they're getting a lot of pushback on that. And, so I wonder about that. It also seems to me in my reading, and that's kind of what you're hinting at, that that labor is easily mobile, right? So that you're going to have the people with the training at the right places at the right time. And I wonder about that, if that's going to make sense. And then, as you're saying, if the money goes to the Green New Deal people, how does it affect other people, other parts of the economy? So from what I'm hearing and what I've read so far, it seems like there's a lot of details to be worked out. I mean, one way that it is not equivalent to the New Deal is that when we had the New Deal and particularly the mobilization for the war, we had a lot of idle productive capacity
Yeah.
So where we were making cars, it was pretty easy to make this transition to make the tanks and all the things that were needed to fight World War II. And some of the same skills were probably used to make a tank as was to make a car. And I don't think people are trained with the same kind of skills, you know, that are going to be needed with the green technology. So I don't know if we have as much idle capacity sitting here that we can just immediately put over to the Green New Deal in the same way that we could with the some of the things that we did with the New Deal. So, I mean, that's a question, and I think that's some of the things that people are, you know, talking about. I wonder if we issue this, you know, so much debt as interest rates go up on the bonds that we've issued, you know, there's going to be some distributional effects, and as we pay the interest of those. So I have some questions as I think forward about doing it. And then I think the Pelosi and the older, I mean, we're seeing a real generational divide here in the Democrats, because I think Nancy Pelosi, who was so good in corralling her caucus as she did with the Affordable Care Act, I think this caucus is going to be harder because this younger generation is really concerned about climate change, and they don't think people are listening, and they are going to go occupy her office and say, you need to do things about this. And so it's going to be interesting to see how she's able to manage, because it's also pushing the candidates running for president, they're being pushed more to the left. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out as we go through the primary, and how how this generational divide, because AOC has she's really out there prominently. And, you know, I don't know if you just saw and they're on the Cohen when she was interviewing Cohen, they had made sure she asked some really thoughtful questions. So she's not just all being seen as this wild radical that dances and things like that with some of these things. So,
what's interesting though, that could lead to an interesting interaction with economists, including heterodox economists, yes. In that, you know, if this Green New Deal gets huge legs and there's huge pressure for everyone to support it, and then there's some economists saying, but wait a moment, it could have some problems. They may be shut out of the dialogue as raining somewhat on the parade. I mean, we noticed the Sunrise movement going and lobbying everyone to sign up to the Green New Deal, and then the social media when Finkelstein, was it? Senator Finkelstein sort of questioned it.
Paul Krugman has questioned it. Larry Summers has been questioning it, and Kenneth Rogoff, you know, the austerity guy.
Yeah, but they would. I suppose Krugman's always, he's obviously somewhat on the left more, but he's not, he's old style.
Yeah, he's old style left, but he does have a platform. More so than, I don't know, Larry Summers and Kenneth Rogoff. I don't think their platform is quite as big. When I was I wrote a paper about economists influencing politicians and how they can do it effectively. And one of the papers I read made the case that economists become most influential when there's a lot of uncertainty. So it seems to me that there is an opportunity right now for heterodox economists to be heard. But as I say, and this is what I like what you're doing at the Mint magazine, is making sure that they're talking to people in a way that is understood, right? Because economists, sometimes they talk in these ways and they use the jargon. And Alan Blinder in his book made a big case about this, that you need to be able to talk to people. And then you also need to be able, economists, particularly the mainstream, focus so much on efficiency that they don't talk as much about equity. And this is where, the heterodox economists, they do that. And institutional economists like I am really talk about power and how this all, an important aspect of the New Deal is the Green New Deal is trying to have a more just system. So there are some ways for people, in addition to modern monetary theory, who are heterodox economists to have a voice now if they do it wisely, right? You know, they talk about equity issues, they learn how to message. They don't just do cost benefit analysis and things like that. That's like this Data for Progress is interesting because they're doing big data research. This is a very left-wing think tank, but they're doing big data, and from, you know, the short introduction, they are writing in a way that's clearly, you know, it's clear to the public. So,
well, that's, I mean, it'd be good if we had a debate that was, you know, had an interchange of views and so on, because sometimes I get the impression that some of the people in the modern monetary theory space are also, you know, have found the truth. There's a great saying that,
that's what my impression is too.
Yeah, that the problem if we, you know, I think there's a quote that struck me was, the problem with the truth is some people sometimes find it.
Yes. Well, I just finished reading Nancy McLean's book about democracy in chains, which she is trying to document the relationship between James Buchanan and the Koch brothers. And it was kind of like the Koch brothers found the truth.
Yeah.
In James Buchanan, of course, he thought he found the truth. And when I finished reading that, I was wondering the same thing about modern monetary theory, except for now we're on the other side of it all. And so I'm going to explore that some more now that I've been sort of there's a juxtaposition. Because I do think their heterodox economists could help in this, but I wonder, you know, I'm not persuaded by everything they say, but I hear they're hard to argue with. As you
Well,
said, have a conversation, right?
Yeah, have a conversation. I mean, that's what we're so keen on having from a pluralist approach, that we can actually have a number of different ways of seeing things and have a reasonable conversation rather than a battle across the trenches, if you see.
Yes, exactly. Because, I mean, there just seems to be some, and I've been asked, trying to have a conversation with somebody this week about it, and so far we haven't gone very far in it all. So it is, I mean, to me, it seems like it's a wonderful opportunity to have heterodox economists heard, because we are in a space where there's a lot of uncertainty in the future, but it seems like only one sector, you know, they're the ones that are being heard. And, you know, I hope that both Bernie Sanders and AOC know enough economics, and they were as open as my candidate was to try to learn. I mean, my candidate was really, and then as I said, we were very careful to say this is our view from the perspective of an institutional economist. I mean, we tried to operate with integrity when we were talking to her about, you know, this is what somebody might say that they don't agree with us, instead of trying to say this is our truth and there's only one way to think about that. So I think that's really important as we move forward.
Well, I think that's a very good place to end, with suggesting that really ultimately it's about integrity.
Yes, well, it is integrity, because we all want the best for society, right? That's what we're involved in all of this, or some of us are. Anyway.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Sherry, and it's been a pleasure, and hopefully we'll have future opportunities to catch up again with further interviews for how this debate plays out.
Yes, well, you've excited me to do some more research.